Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Education USA's Saturday webinar in India. Thank you for joining us. Today's session is on athletic scholarships in the US. Before I introduce today's speaker, I would like to share some information about who we are and what we do. Education USA is a US Department of State supported body, and our mandate is to provide accurate, current, and comprehensive information to students who are looking to pursue higher studies in the US. We have 7 advising centers in India and over 400 worldwide. For more information, please visit educationusa.state.gov. In our efforts to reach more students, we conduct virtual information twice a month on Saturday at 10 a.m. We invite you and your friends to join us for these sessions where you can learn more about the different aspects of higher study in the US. At this point, I'm going to ask all the participants to type into the chat box if you have any technical issues, and I will respond and try to help you deal with them. At the end of the session, we will have a question and answer session, so I request that you keep your questions till the end. For today's session, our speaker is Dane Raleigh, Director of International Admission at California Lutheran University. We are ready to begin. The floor is all yours.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I'm very happy to be able to join you this morning as well, or I guess this afternoon, or as we move from morning to afternoon there in India. From California, welcome, and very happy to be here. So my name is Dane Rowley, and I serve as Director of International Admission at California Lutheran University, a small private or medium-sized private university in Southern California. But my task today is not to talk about my institution, but to share some broad knowledge about being a scholar athlete, about potentially being an athlete in the United States. And so the title of the session is The Scholar Athlete, Intercollegiate Athletics and Scholarships in the USA. So we'll go ahead and jump right into it. What we'll talk about today, an overview of college athletics, the various ways that students can participate. There is certainly the most famous, the NCAA, but there's also the NAIA that I'll talk about. There's also an athletics league for junior colleges for students that want to do a 2+2 at the undergraduate level. There are high-level athletic competitions based on that. I'll break down within the NCAA Division 1, 2, and 3 and the various differences, characteristics, the rules, and the regulations for each division. Some tips for communicating your ability and interest with admission officers and also with coaches. One of the most important questions that you'll need to ask yourself as you go through this process, and this is true both for academics and athletics, to really understand how competitive you are compared to what the university is looking for. Finding that match is one of the most important elements of a college or university search in the United States, whether it's athletics, academics, arts, understanding yourself, being very honest with yourself, and matching that with the capabilities of the institution, and then also share some next steps and resources as well. All right, so an overview of collegiate athletics. Why do students want to compete? Certainly, they love their sport. They want to continue building leadership and teamwork. They want to continue to maintain their physical health. For many student athletes, it's become a part of their life, a part of their culture. For some students, it is also part of future aspirations that they may have dreams to compete professionally once they're done with university, maybe go on and be an amateur athlete within the Olympic, World Games, or other world competitions, and certainly scholarships. My argument tends to be that scholarships should not always be the first reason and the number one reason why students want to compete with athletics, partly because statistically, it is very competitive to get athletic scholarships in the United States. We will talk about that, and that is one of the main focus areas of this presentation, but also know that it is very, very competitive. And so I'll try and give some tips about how to evaluate yourself and also some feedback that I've received from coaches over the years about what they're looking for certain types of sports. Now you have some options to compete with athletics in the United States and to continue your passion for sport. One of them is what's called intramural sports, and this is unofficial. It's something that you might join a club at the university. Maybe you get together with your friends and roommates and compete in a weekend basketball tournament or a semester-long soccer league or a basketball league. And it's something where you compete with other students and perhaps professors in good sportsmanship, competitive, but you're not competing against other universities. The next layer or the next level up would be club sports. And these are sports that are not governed by any official university intercollegiate sports body, but they might be unofficial ways to compete against other close nearby universities. So, for example, the university may not have a Division I rugby team, but they might have a club rugby team, and that team travels around to other colleges or universities within the area to compete, or friendly competition, not something that's really tracked or done in any kind of organized tournament. But still a way, especially for some sports like that are maybe a little bit less popular in the United States. Often those kinds of sports, like rugby as an example, often are more club sports for many universities and not full sponsored university activities. And then there's three official bodies in the United States. The first two, NAIA and NCAA, is where I'll spend most of my time. But there also is the National Junior College Athletics Association, and that's for students that want to study at the two-year college level, which is definitely a very feasible option for many students. And that's a place for students to be able to also compete in athletics. But I'm going to focus mostly on NAIA and NCAA. NAIA is the National Association of Intercollegiate Athletics. It's less known than the NCAA. The universities that are part of the NAIA are quite wide-ranging. There's actually many, many sports, many universities, 250 universities in the United States that participate in NAIA-sponsored athletics. About 65,000 athletes and over $600 million in athletic scholarships given across these 21 conferences. And you can see on the screen a list of men's sports and women's sports that are participating in NAIA schools. The process, in some ways this is similar to the NCAA, but you need to register with playnaia.org. And by registering, you can then connect with the 250 universities and colleges, the coaches, and the potential scholarships. It's really important as you're looking at these institutions to find the right fit of university. NAIA schools tend to be medium-sized universities throughout the United States. Many of them are in the Midwest, so many of those states that you're maybe not as familiar with, but states that provide great cost of living benefits, great universities as well. And within the playnaia.org, you can also provide videos and competition. They also have annual showcase events if you can make it to the United States to be able to, in live, be able to perform and have coaches take a look at you. So NAIA, again, is a very wide range of universities, but it's not quite as big as NCAA by any means, but is definitely an option. And the best place to go to find out what those universities are is this website here on the screen. I'll also share some resources towards the end as well. Now, what I think most of you are familiar with and probably want to know more information about today is the NCAA, National Collegiate Athletic Association. They're separated into three divisions. And among Division I schools, which are probably, they tend to be the most well-known schools. These are schools of the 351, also often are nationally ranked. They often will show up in maybe top 100 lists of universities. Very large research universities tend to be Division I, but there's 351 Division I universities that sponsor intercollegiate sports in the United States. And that represents and the average enrollment at those institutions is about 10,000 students. Then Division II schools, there's 308, and this represents about 28% of the NCAA. So about 1 out of 4 NCAA schools are Division II, and there's 308 universities there. And then for Division III, and this is a number that often surprises students, 40% of NCAA universities and colleges in the U.S. are actually Division III. 443 universities, one of which is California Lutheran University, or Division III NCAA university. And the average university size for Division III schools is quite a bit lower, about 1,700 students. So as you can say, Division One tends to be schools that have quite a bit more resources in terms of personnel, of students, of coaches. They tend to be larger universities, and as we'll talk about, a lot of athletes. Over 430,000 athletes each year on average participate in intercollegiate sports through Division One, Division Two, and Division Three schools in the NCAA. A little bit about some of the sports that are offered within the NCAA, and this is separated out into seasons. I know this may not equate to the actual seasons that you have in India, in most parts of India, but the fall sports tend to go from late August until around November. And then winter sports typically kind of span 2 different semesters. They may include both fall and spring semester, but they run from about November until March each year. And then spring sports essentially are January through May. And then there's some emerging sports. These are sports that maybe some universities have or are trying out, but are not quite as widely known. There are some opportunities for students to be able to compete in multiple sports, but typically with winter sports, those are very difficult for students to do 2 sports because it does, in the winter sports, they do tend to overlap. Now, you'll notice a couple of things that are unique in terms of winter sports. One is in Midwest areas in the U.S. where there's very cold winters, they actually have a separate track and field sports for indoor in the winter, and then they have outdoor spring sports for track and field. So for students who are runners, short distance, long distance, various track and field events, you actually may be able to have 2 seasons, both indoor and outdoor. In California, everything's outdoors because we don't have the kind of cold that maybe some of the schools in the Midwest. A little bit about some of those sports. Now, broadly speaking, Division One and Division Two schools, I'm going to share a few important characteristics of these institutions. They tend to be highly competitive. There is a very wide range of educational options within these institutions. For example, there's some very large universities, but there's also some very small universities as well, public and private, universities that are completely secular, and some that are very religious, and some that are not very religious at all. Some universities that might hold athletes who aren't even religious to the same living standards of within that religious tradition, but most universities would be more secular within these Division One and Two schools. Some are liberal arts colleges, some are comprehensive, many of them are research universities. There are some limits with Division One and Two schools for the contact between student and coach, between recruiter and recruited athlete, and we will talk about those and talk about the timeline for communication as well between students and coaches. And there are very specific eligibility requirements, including academic requirements, both before students are recruited and after, while they're attending university. There's some requirements for GPA and other athletic and academic parameters while students are competing. Scholarships may be available. Now, I say may be available because just because a student may play for a Division One or Two school does not necessarily mean they will have scholarships. But those scholarships can range between perhaps a few $1,000s. Some scholarships could actually cover housing, food, other expenses as well as tuition. So really, it depends on the level of competitiveness, the eligibility of the student, as well as the excellence of the student in that particular sport is going to have an impact. But if a student is really exceptional, they could get a scholarship that covers more than tuition within that institution. Now, time commitments. I think this is something that students maybe don't think about, but I think it's very important. For Division One and Two schools, what type of balance do students achieve? And the time spent on activities per week. So if you think about a week, waking hours of about 168 hours in a week that students are actually awake, Division One athletes tend to spend about 34 of those hours in athletics, about 38 of those hours in academics, about 15 hours socializing or relaxing, and then 80 hours. And actually, that does include sleep and jobs and things like that. So I guess it's not waking hours, it's total hours in the week. Now, for Division Two schools, you'll see it's actually pretty similar, about 38.5 in academics, little bit less, about 2 hours less per week in athletics. So Division II doesn't necessarily mean that you're not competing or not practicing as much or competing as much, but there's a little bit less time that you'd be spending as a student athlete at a Division II school versus Division I. And this is average, pretty wide ranging. And some sports you're going to spend more time, some sports a little bit less time. So the process for Division I and II schools, this is very important. First, through this website, eligibilitycenter.org, students must create a certification account or profile. That's the very first step in being a recruited or trying to be a recruited athlete for Division I or Division II schools. On that application or that certification account, you're going to provide a lot of personal information about your school, what type of school it is, what type of curriculum it is, information about your family, certainly information about your sport, but I'll talk about that a little bit more. There are GPA requirements, and these are requirements that you must meet before you can be eligible to be recruited. You have to have at least a 2.3 GPA or the equivalent in your country's educational system. So this is a C average, C plus average that you must have to be able to be cleared to be able to be recruited, and the possibility of being recruited to a Division I or II school. There also is an SAT or ACT requirement. So even if the university has gone test optional, based on NCAA rules and regulations, the students who are recruited athletes must still have an SAT or ACT score that matches the GPA. Now, in the end, I'll share a resource guide, and there's lots of websites and downloadable forms. And one of those forms that you'll find is the student guide that has a very thorough chart of, with the GPA that you have, what is a corresponding SAT or ACT score that you must demonstrate. And there has to be a certain range that falls within. They don't want to see a student who has a very low GPA but a very high SAT. That's something that would be concerning for the NCAA. That's something, again, that's surprising for many students, that being a recruited athlete is not just about athletics. It's about academics as well. You have to pay to be a certified athlete within the system and to be have the opportunity to be recruited. That payment does cost you as international students more than a U.S. student. So the fee is $150 for international students versus $90 for a U.S. student to be certified. Other things that are required you have to think about, you have to provide transcripts. Those transcripts have to be translated into English by a certified translation, and that has to be evaluated as part of that. Now, number 6, this is an interesting part, demonstrating amateur status. We'll actually come back to these other English requirements. So NCAA requires students to be amateurs, amateur athletes. Now, what does that mean to be an amateur athlete? Well, it essentially means that you really can't be making a lot of money or getting sponsorships or product endorsements as a student athlete. You have to be someone who if you are making any kind of money or having prize money, it's a very modest amount, and they cover travel expenses or things like that. So within that amateur status questionnaire that's included as part of your certification process, it's going to ask you things about your education background, your athletic participation. It's going to ask whether or not you've received any kind of compensation that goes beyond, as I said before, travel expenses to be able to compete in a sport. Have you received any kind of compensation for media appearances or local events that celebrate local athletes? Have you received assistance from agents? Now, that doesn't mean that if you have some kind of independent counselor or agency counselor or advisor that you're automatically not amateur, but they want to find out more. They want to make sure that there's not somebody else making money off of you and your athletic talent, because that would mean that you're a professional athlete, not an amateur athlete, and the NCAA is about amateur athletics. They also will want to ask you if you are endorsing commercial products or services or accepting prize money. There are some exemptions. Tennis and golf, there's a little bit wider latitude or range given for students who have won awards or prize money. But for most sports, they really don't want to see student athletes winning a lot of prize money for their sport. So these are things that are very important as a part of the process for certification. Another thing that they're looking for students, that they will have completed these types of subject areas within high school. So these are academic requirements while you're in high school that would be required before you can be a recruited athlete, or at least in process. And I think the good news is for most students in most schools in India and in the region, these are all courses that you will be taking in compulsory subjects in your state boards anyway. But they want to see in the transcript that you are having a well-rounded curriculum, that you have language, not just English, but your native language, sciences, math, some social sciences, as well as a couple of additional subjects as well. Now, the timeline. I think this is probably one of the more important slides and provides a great view into what you could or should be doing throughout the process and throughout the time that you'd be looking to be a recruited athlete in the NCAA Division I or Division II. So in grade 9, as you're kind of 14, 15, you're going to look at making sure you're taking the right courses, that your academic plan matches what the NCAA requires, and you're getting to know your country's academic guidelines. And again, this is pulled directly from the NCAA, and there's a link to this information as well as all the information at the end as well. Now in grade 10, as you move up in the next year, as you continue to compete and work hard in your courses, as it says here, don't take shortcuts to catch up. You want to make sure you're maintaining eligibility. But you're also going to start to create your certification account at this young age, actually, within still 2 to 3 years before you actually graduate from university. Then in grade 11, I think this is where it's really important to prepare for the SAT and ACT. One of the things that's not listed here, which is really important, is starting to really identify which universities to which you're thinking about applying to. And I think this is true of non-athletes as well. 11th grade, or the year before you graduate from university or from high school, is the best time to compile that list of universities that you're hoping to apply to. And I think the advice I give students for academic searches and for the general college search and selection process is similar for athletes as it is for all students, which is you want to have some schools that are a reach, schools that are kind of dream, schools that maybe your level of competitiveness, you may not fully reach that point, but you want to go for it. And then also to be very self-aware that you have a list of schools that are comfortable, that you think pretty comfortable that you match their profile and what they're looking for in terms of athletic potential. And then also some other schools that might be safe schools or schools that are backup options for you as well. But in that college search, you want to take a look at that, and then also taking a look at the SAT and ACT. Then in grade 12, your final year, you're finalizing your amateur certification, which is again going to show that you're not a paid professional athlete at that level. You're going to ask your school to submit official transcripts to the NCAA. You may want to take the ACT or SAT again, and meet all the other university requirements. One of the things I'm not covering in this session as much is the fact that while you're also working to be a recruited athlete, you're also needing to meet all the other requirements that the university has for academic admissibility as well. And knowing that even if you're an amazing athlete, you have to be very aware of how selective the university is in their academic profile as well as their athletic. I think it's a misconception that if you're an exceptional athlete that you're still going to get into one of the most selective universities in the U.S. They want to make sure students will do well as a student first, an athlete second. So a little bit about the timeline. Again, there's plenty of information about this. There is a different recruiting calendar for many of these sports. And so there's a link here, and it's okay if you don't remember all of this. You don't have to write this down. You can take a picture of it if you'd like. The other thing too is I shared my email address at the beginning of the presentation. I'll share it at the end as well. And I'm happy to send you by email a copy of these slides so that you have them. But for basketball, football, lacrosse, softball, baseball, ice hockey, each one of those sports has a different calendar or a different timeline for when you can talk to a coach. And this is really, really important. So you'll see on the chart here, this is for all the other Division I sports. You can access, it kind of gives you an idea of what point, so after June 15th, between your second and third year, is when a coach can start sending you materials via social media, text messages, recruiting letters. Then, after June 15th, between sophomore and junior year of high school, you and your family may actually call a coach, but you have to initiate that. And then after that is when the coach also may call you. You may have contact off campus after August 1st of your junior year of high school. You can have an unofficial visit after that. But then you can't do an official visit at a college university until August 1st of your junior year in high school. And so there's some very strict rules and timing for when students can be communicating and corresponding with a coach. So that's important to know. And that's for all the other sports in Division I except for the ones that are listed above. For Division II and III, it's very different. One of the things you'll notice is that with Division III, partly because Division III schools do not offer athletic scholarships at all. There is much more range of options for students. You'll see on the far right column that students can receive printed materials at any time. You can make contact with a coach as early as 9th grade in high school. You can visit college campuses. That there are a lot more options for students as well. Whereas with Division II, because there are some scholarships involved, these timelines actually mirror in many ways what the Division I university sports are. And again, if you would like a copy of this so that you can actually take a look at it and really get to know the schedule and plan this out in your college search, I'm happy to be able to send this to you. So as I mentioned, Division III schools are a little bit different. They are still very competitive. Some conferences are a little bit more competitive in some sports than other sports, depending on the culture, the background of that specific part of the United States. In places like California and Nevada and Arizona and Florida, water sports tend to be a little bit more popular. In places like New England, rowing or crew is a popular sport where it's not really that popular here. So there's different regions where there's different sports that are popular, and this is true for Division III as well, and some that are more competitive. There are a wide range of Division III universities in the U.S., private, public, small, medium, just like the Division I and II schools, although there's not a lot of large universities that are Division III. Most Division III schools tend to be small to medium-sized universities. There are not many limits for contact between coaches and students in Division III, as I mentioned, and there are not the same eligibility requirements in terms of any kind of clearance process. Students for Division III athletics do not have to complete an amateur survey. They don't have to complete the certification. There's not any kind of NCAA vetting of high school students in order to be eligible for Division III. So essentially, any student athlete can communicate with coaches and go for that. You still have to meet the admission requirements of that university. Some of the benefits of Division III is the balance is a little bit more towards being a student than an athlete. Competition is considered to be one of many aspects to the educational experience. One of the other benefits of Division III that students don't always realize is that if you want to do internships or study abroad, for some Division I or II sports, when you're bound to that institution in terms of your funding, where athletic participation is key in you being able to afford it, you may have to make other sacrifices. You may not be able to study abroad for a semester, or your internship opportunities or research opportunities may be limited based on the time that you have to give to that sport because the scholarships that you have to keep. Whereas with Division III, because scholarships tend to be based really just on artistic talent and academic ability, you're free to maybe drop out of that sport for a semester if you want, take a break from the sport and go study abroad or have a key internship that you're looking for. And so your college attendance, your scholarships retention is not connected to your athletics. And also another benefit for Division III for some really competitive athletes is that you'll get more playing time early. So say you're a great athlete, but you might not get playing time at a Division I or II school until you're a junior or senior, but maybe as a freshman, you'll be a star at a Division III school. So there's some benefits to being at Division III schools. Now, one of the things I want to share that's on the slide is some information or feedback that I've received from some coaches that teach at Division III universities about what they're looking for. So first, for Division III, this is from a Division III golf coach. The coach says golf these days has to be very competitive, that golfers need to have about a 5 handicap, which is an average score of about 76. They typically need to be national junior tournament goers in their country. So if you want to be a golfer, even at a Division III school, you would have to really be competing at a national level to be competing at a Division III level. So that means that if you want to be a Division I or II scholarship athlete in golf, you'd have to do quite a bit more than that. In terms of sports like volleyball and basketball, height tends to be really important. So for Division III volleyball, for example, height is not typically as important as students who are quite a bit taller for Division I and II schools or sports in things like volleyball and basketball. For swimming, for men's water polo, athletes should be able to swim a 50-yard freestyle swim in 23 seconds, 100 yards in 51 seconds. Now, if you're not a water sport athlete, this isn't going to make a lot of sense, but just giving you a couple of ideas for some of the sports that are out there and what they may be looking for. Now, for tennis, even at a Division III school, coaches are looking for students who are in the top 20 to 30 in their country in their age range. And so one of the things that I really want you to take away from this is even being a recruited Division III athlete is highly competitive, even if scholarship money is not connected to that on the athletic side. But you could still get some very generous scholarships on the academic side. So some next steps. I think this is the first point is probably one of the most important, which is determining how important athletics is to you. What, as you think about the wide range of considerations for university studies, where does athletics fall in terms of what's going to be a deciding factor or factors for you in your university studies? Is it more important than the university having the right location, the right average class size, the right faculty profile, the right academic studies? Where does athletics fall in that estimation or that evaluation? Now, that's going to be different for you than it will be for any other student, and it's a very personal process. But I think it's important to have that internal reflection. The next is to be very honest and very aware of your own athletic interest and your ability. And this is hard because I think students and parents tend to either underestimate themselves or overestimate themselves. We have a really hard time being very reasonable with exactly what our actual abilities are. Yeah, but I think this is true, as I mentioned earlier, for students choosing the right fit in university for the academic profile as well as the athletic profile. What we often see is students mismatch in their fit. They might think that they have an athletic profile of this much, but really they're at here, but the university is up here. And that typically when that happens, there's disappointment because the students are applying to schools that they're ill-matched for. And so this is really important to truly assess your athletic ability as well as your academic ability so that you're picking universities that are about the same level of competitiveness that you are. There are over 4,000 colleges and universities in the United States. And as we saw at the beginning, there are hundreds and hundreds of Division I, II, and III schools. I am confident that there is a fit out there for you. It just may mean that you need to be more open geographically, more open to universities maybe that you haven't heard of. Research universities, find out statistics and retention for athletes. Do universities provide special coaching or tutoring or resources? Do athletic teams have adequate medical support? Do the athletic programs have faculty mentors or professors who attend meetings and practices to give you advice and to make sure that you're staying connected to your first job as a student, which is to be a student? And also find out what's the right way to contact universities. Often admission offices are a little bit disconnected at many Division I and II schools, where you're really doing a lot of your communication with the coaches, whereas Division III schools, you really need to form a relationship with your admission counselor who also can help facilitate conversation and connection with your coach. There are a lot of opportunities for you to build film or build videos of you providing a showcase for your athletic ability. as well as recommendation letters and your amateur status. Some questions to ask universities when you're on a campus visit, when you're looking at the websites. I think these are great questions, not just for athletics, but for all students. For example, graduation rates. What's the percentage of students that take 4 years to graduate versus 6? Trying to find out, maybe talking to a current athlete at that university, what's the coach's style like? And this is something very, very important, and athletes know this, that you may love a sport, you may be brilliant at it, but if you and the coach don't match, you're not going to perform to your utmost ability. So finding out a little bit ahead of time, what kind of sports medicine and athletic training is available if you get injured? What are their policies about that in terms of your scholarship? Those are all things that I think are very important to think about in terms of university. The other thing that's not on here that I really, this is something, no matter what group I talk to about, no matter what topic, I really encourage you to think about career services at the universities to which you're looking. Do the universities provide mentoring and coaching workshops, things like how to interview for a job or how to negotiate salary with a new job offer without offending your new boss? Finding that balance between confidence and humility, those are soft skills and some of the skills that you will not learn in a computer networking class or in a financial management class or a sociology class. But universities should be providing very robust career service resources, one-on-one counseling, as well as career fairs and internship fairs. Something I'd really encourage you to think about as you're looking at universities. So asking, again, coming back to this really key question of how competitive am I? Looking at the team stats, maybe some videos, watching that team, that basketball team, how do they compete with each other? How do they play with each other? How do you see yourself fitting within that? And so spending a lot of time online and searching and finding out about those teams, looking at the roster, looking at the coaches, and doing that research. And also check with the timelines that we talked about, talking with your current coach. And as I mentioned, resources. And I'm actually gonna come back to that, but I want to make sure that you get, again, my email that's there, drowley@callutheran.edu. The advisors there at Education USA and across India also would be able to get this information to you. But I'm happy to be able to send these slides to you and engage in conversation with you about this. But here are some resources as well. So NCAA, the general website, place for FAQs, frequently asked questions. This next one is really important, the Student Athlete Guide. Almost everything you need to know is in about a 40-page PDF document that you can download for yourself. That's in the Student Athlete Guide. There's also a PDF that's there, a link there that you can see that's some specific international requirements for international students, as well as some contact information within the NCAA if you have questions. And then also there's one non-NCAA organization that the NCAA recommends, and it's called informedathlete.com, and that link is there. On the NCAA website, they actually recommend this individual who has great information about being a student athlete. It's called informedathlete.com. And then also the NAIA, as we talked about in the beginning of the session, the website for NAIA.
Thank you so much, Dane, for such a wonderful presentation. We will now open the floor for questions. You will see there are a few questions that have already, been asked by students. So, Dane, if you don't mind, you can read out the question and answer.
Okay, let me see how I'm.
Or if you want, I can go ahead and read out the question.
Yeah, I don't actually. I can't see the questions.
So it should be in the questions tab on the control panel. In the meantime, I will go ahead and read out the first question for you.
Okay, yeah, please.
The question goes, hi Dane, thank you for your time. I'm in the sport of sailing, into racing, sailing, and have been part of the national team. I could not see my sport listed in the NCAA. Will this be in the category of intramural sports? Also, I did some checking for sailing. It comes under Intercollegiate Sailing Association. So in continuation of that question, the student also asks that, can you help me, guide me through the process?
Yeah, that's a great question. So for sports like that, that maybe have their own internal organization that spans, that's more of a sailing organization, those would not fall within the NCAA or NAIA. And so all of the things we talked about in terms of the certification that students have to have, the way that they show amateur status, would not, those rules wouldn't necessarily apply. There may be rules that the Sailing Association or the Intercollegiate Sailing Association has, um, but it wouldn't be under the purview of the NCAA. And so, and my assumption would be as well that scholarships may not be as forthcoming in those types of sports and activities. That may not be true across the board, but I think once you go outside the NCAA Division One and Division Two, it's going to be a little more hit and miss whether there's going to be any kind of scholarships available based on that. There may be other benefits that the university has in terms of giving you access to the equipment and the resources and materials you need to continue a passion in your life. But it may not be the same type of thing where you're being able to pay for college through participation in that activity. But I would do more research, and certainly if you want to reach out to me, I'm happy to help out as well. But doing some more research about that association for that niche sport or that niche activity to find out what their requirements are, and then also doing searching on the university website, finding out which universities have sailing clubs or sailing teams, and that may be housed within a student activity instead of a student athletics. So don't just look at which sports the university has, but also look under their roster of clubs and extracurricular activities. That may be where you find it. And that's true often of equestrian or horse riding activities. They're not always offered within the athletic website, but you'd have to look at the student life or the activities website.
That's great. Thank you, Dane. The next question is there any eligibility for Indian athletes, like a medal or a timing?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure what they're asking. So repeat that
Um,
again.
yes, the question is there any eligible? I think the student is trying to ask if there is an eligibility criteria, such as, a requirement for a medal that they have received in their sport.
Oh, oh wow. I don't think so. I think that each sport or each university is going to be looking for different markers of success or competitiveness. I don't think that the NCAA would be asking for that in that specific sport, but a specific university might be more interested in you because you've achieved that, won that medal, or achieved a high level of competition in a specific tournament. But in terms of that, will be a question in the questionnaire that's offered to you in the student amateur status. They might say, okay, what awards have you won? What trophies or other prizes have you earned based on that? But I don't think there's anything specific that sports are asking for.
All right. So I think the next question is very specific. The student has said, I'm a sprinter and my timing is 22.8 in 200 meters. So what are my chances of getting a scholarship?
Yeah, that's not. I wouldn't be able to answer that question. I think where I would start if I were that student, where I would start is pick maybe one or two Division One schools through looking at ncaa.org. Pick a couple of Division Two schools, and then pick a couple of Division Three schools. And this is kind of a research activity. Find their track and field websites. Look at the most recent track and field competition from last season and find out what times those standout athletes at each of those levels, Division One, Division Two, Division Three, and then maybe a couple of NAIA schools, and do a sampling of some universities and where some of their standout athletes, what times they've had. That might give you a better benchmark for where you fit within some of that competitiveness. But I don't know track and field well enough to be able to say how competitive you would be. But doing a little bit of research, I think doing that might take you 30, 40 minutes. And that would tell you a lot about where you fit and where your talents may fall.
That's a great advice, Dane. I think that was the last question for today's webinar.
Okay,
Um,
great.
but Thank you again for such an informative presentation, Dane. And thank you
Thank you.
everyone for joining us. Please stay tuned to our Facebook India page for information on upcoming webinars. Thank you once again, and we hope you have a good day.
Thank you so much.